Hello and a very warm welcome to this Met Dialogue. My name is Guntram Wolff and I'm the director of Bruegel, and I'm very pleased to host today, together with Silvia Borrelli from the Financial Times in Milan, the Met Dialogue with Commissioner Paolo Gentiloni. Paolo Gentiloni is the commissioner, as we know, responsible for economic affairs here in Europe, and has a full plate at this stage, a lot of things that have to be agreed in literally the coming weeks. There is a big discussion on the EU budget, but there is also, of course, major discussions about the future relations between Europe and the United States. What does it all mean for our economies? And of course, there's still a pandemic which has a huge economic fallout, not just in Europe, but all across the world. And since Commissioner Gentiloni was very involved also in Italian politics and also in the Met itself, the Met conference itself, we would love to hear from him to start with his view on the EU approach and what the EU is currently doing in the Mediterranean region more broadly, but especially also in the southern Mediterranean region, on overcoming and helping countries to cope with the pandemic economically, but also more broadly. Commissioner, thank you so much for joining this Met conference, and we look forward to hearing from you about first your view on the broader Mediterranean region and what the EU is doing to help. And then Silvia will take the next question.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Guntram, for your question. I'm very happy to participate to this new Med Dialogue edition. Of course, unfortunately, not in person. I think in these years, the European commitment on Mediterranean is clearer, we could say stronger, but this doesn't mean that problems and difficulties are for this solved, or that situation are easier. The big thing in this moment is, of course, the tension that we have in Eastern Mediterranean and the involvement in these tensions of some member states of the European Union, Greece and Cyprus, and their relation with Turkey. And this will be one of the issues of the next European Council. We are working strongly with the Western Balkans region, now very much affected by the second wave of the pandemic. And so we are working with them to contribute also practically, for example, on the vaccine distribution, and not only encouraging, as always, cooperation and economic development. And then, of course, there is maybe the main issue, which is the relation with the southern Mediterranean and North Africa, where yes, indeed, in relation to a few years ago, we have probably a less dramatic situation concerning migration flows. At least numbers are not comparable with numbers that we had from 2014 to 2017. But of course, situation of instability in several countries still there. And what worries me is that the level of economic cooperation among these countries is not growing. trade relation among these countries, I think, is under 10% of their trade relation in general. And the differences between Europe and the southern Mediterranean countries, unfortunately, is growing, both from an economic point of view. I mean, the personal wealth, average personal wealth, and on demography, because we are getting older and they are younger and younger. So, of course, there is here basis for a future problem. What are we working on? We are giving our financial assistance to several countries. We are having a lot of development projects also through the European or European influenced banks, EIB and EBRD. They have a lot of projects in these countries, and we are trying to have politically an influence. A couple of days ago, two commissioners were visiting Morocco to face new signs of crisis in migration. So we have permanent relation. And we have an increased awareness of the importance. And we have a lot of trade and a lot of investment. But the pillars of the needed solution, which are, from my point of view, cooperation among these member states and reduction of the differences between these two areas of the world, these pillars are not yet evolving in the right direction.
Thank you, Commissioner. Nice to see you this year at the Med again.
Good morning.
Good morning to you. So I was wondering, the G20 recently endorsed a common framework for debt treatments aimed at addressing the problem of unsustainable debts that is faced by many countries, especially in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. Some European officials suggested that public debt related to COVID-19 should be cancelled. This obviously is quite controversial, but the theme of unsustainable debts very much exists. Do you think we are moving in the right direction? Do you think we can expect any form of debt relief? And how do you see the situation of public debt evolving in Europe and beyond?
Well, I think we cannot in any way overlap two different situations. There is, of course, the situation of the poorest countries of the world, and we are, as a commission, working very hard within the G20, and I think some results were reached in the G20 in the last months, not only the suspension of the debt service, which is now used by almost 50 countries, but also this common framework you were referring to, which is very important because it gives a framework not only for public but also for private creditors to have a common attitude towards countries restructuring their debt. And unfortunately, we have already several countries, especially African countries, in the pipeline to use these new tools. So this is very good. We are supporting an extension of the debt service suspension, and we were very active in supporting this common framework. We are also asking other member states of the G20 and G7 to strengthen the IMF in its capacities, reallocating non-used special drawing rights. Well, rather technical issues. That means that we could give to the IMF, that is now requested by more than 100 countries of help in different ways, to have more firepower. This is an issue, but we cannot mix this issue with the situation that we live in the European Union. Of course, we will come out of this crisis with a higher level of debt. Our estimate is that the level of debt will be around 103, 104% on average in the euro area in 2020 and in 2021. And of course, we will have to discuss how our rules that are in our treaties can be reviewed. We have a review already going on. We will take it again next year to discuss many things, the path, the possible differentiation of this path to debt reduction, possibility to have stronger public investment, but all these issues are not related with things like debt cancellation. This is something we are discussing for African poor countries, not for members of the European Union, of course.
Thank you, Commissioner. So a clear no to any discussion of debt cancellation between the central bank, the European Central Bank, and the national fiscal authorities in Europe. So let me push you a little bit on the issue of the fiscal rules and more broadly the fiscal stance in the coming years. The fiscal rules are currently suspended, but they will kick in at some stage unless we change them. The EU changes them. And one important rule is, of course, the debt rule, which in principle stipulates that we should see debt levels converge back to 60% relatively quickly. Should we ignore that rule or set it off, or is that thinking around debt level still actually appropriate, given that interest rates are so low? At the end of the day, debt service costs have been falling, even though the debt levels are increasing. Should we not really go for a very different debt framework? And if we cannot achieve a different debt framework, how will we go about practically with the existing rules? How much flexibility do we have to prevent austerity in 2021, 22 in particular, when the rules will start probably to be applied again?
Yes, thank you for your question. I would answer giving you a little bit of a timeline of what are my priorities, and of course also the priorities that I want to share with the Commission and the College. What we are now asked, I think, is especially three things. One, give clear message that member states should keep their supportive fiscal policy, because we can't run the risk of a double dip recession, and we should keep a supportive fiscal policy in all member states, also in member states with high level of debt. Of course, they should take care of what happened in the mid and long term, but this doesn't mean that they should withdraw prematurely supportive measures, because we are not yet out of the woods on the crisis. Second, we have to overcome a veto of a couple of countries, and I'm of course worried about this, but confident that we can be able to overcome this veto in the next days. And anyway, we will go on with Next Generation EU. And third, we are working very much, and this work will increase in the next weeks, of course, on the quality of national recovery and resilience plans that are presented from member states. This is I have to say, priorities for these weeks. And then ratification of everything. Then I think maybe next spring we will add to these two big priorities. One is review of the fiscal rules. Of course, we are not changing the treaties. At least it's not in my capacity to change the treaties. We can discuss of this. We can do it we have a conference on the future of Europe. We will see. But we can review and also not only interpreting, but also changing, if needed, legislation on the path, the methods, the duration of this path towards the goals that are inscripted in the treaties about the debt. And as you know, we have already, as a college, received some proposals, especially from the European Fiscal Board, about how to try to manage the new situation of such a high debt, encouraging public investment and discussing how the debt rule can be adapted without changing the treaties to the new situation of so high average debt that we will face in the next year. And then the second big issue for spring, so to say, will be, of course, what we call here in Brussels the own resources, which is the basis to repay from 2026 to 2056 the common debt that we are issuing for common purpose. And this common debt is already being issued. I always stress this point because this sure mechanism that I am very proud of with my colleague Nicolas Schmidt, we managed, I think, a very important thing. We already issued 41 billion euros in 1 month or something like this. In social bonds, we have indeed a new safe asset denominated in euro. And this issuing did not have negative influence in weaker paper, because we are seeing that from Italy to Portugal to Greece, their emission, their bonds are in a very low level of interest rates, despite the fact that there is a new issuer of euro-denominated bonds in the financial markets. So a lot of things to do, and of course this discussion on fiscal rules will be crucial. I would like to have this discussion not exactly in these days and weeks, but maybe better next spring/summer. I don't like the overlapping of this discussion with the crisis we are facing now.
So, Commissioner, in terms of the crisis, we know the EU is negotiating a 1.8 trillion budget and recovery package, and we know there has been opposition by a few countries. Now, yesterday, Poland said it could drop its opposition to the package under certain circumstances. The pandemic and the need to fund an effective response has overcome budget negotiations, and obviously many countries, including Italy, are awaiting the funds from the Next Generation EU to reboot their economy. So how do you see that negotiation evolving, and can you tell us anything in terms of timeline and when you expect to reach an agreement?
Well, I think that we don't have much time. The right time is next week. As you know, we'll have the European Council here in Brussels. I am personally, I've always been worried but confident that at the end we will overcome this veto. Three things are clear. First, that the rule of law is not an optional in the European Union, not at all. Second, that Hungary and Poland strongly need these tools, both Next Generation EU and the European budget. And third, that the fact that we have the German rotating presidency in charge, in office now, is maybe also a good advantage in looking for this, for a solution. Of course, we will not surrender to a veto. This should be very clear to Hungary and Poland. But I am still confident that we will overcome this veto. How can you do this? Well, the roads of diplomacy are, as you know, very different. But fortunately, it's not me that I am discussing this kind of possible solution. But the premises is that I think we are very clear towards these member states that we will go on without them. But I'm confident that we will, at the end, make the agreement happen.
Commissioner, let's move on to a different topic, which is also in your portfolio, which is taxation, and more specifically climate, the link between taxation and climate issues, which I find one of the most important issues that is currently being discussed. We know that the EU itself has very ambitious targets for achieving its climate goals, for which carbon taxation is necessary. But there's also an international dimension to it, which is adjusting for carbon leakage and preventing carbon leakage with a carbon border adjustment mechanism. In the US, we have a new president coming in early next year, who himself has mentioned the topic of border carbon adjustment as an important prerequisite for more vigorous climate action in the United States. You, as the commissioner responsible for taxation and also the border carbon adjustment mechanism, at least to some extent, can you share some lights on how you see the negotiations on border carbon adjustment going with the future president, and what would be your priorities, European priorities from the...
Well, indeed, I think that things are evolving in a better way this autumn, because of course this carbon border adjustment mechanism, as now we call the carbon tax in this way, was already in the program of the Commission since the beginning, in my mission letter and in von der Leyen speeches to the Parliament. But at a certain point, someone described the risk of a European Union running a little bit too fast and alone on this issue. And indeed, we decided with this deep crisis of the pandemic not to put on hold the issue of the green transition, but to accelerate, as you know. This risk, I think, has been reducing in the last months. We had a good autumn from this point of view. From the Xi Jinping announcement to the UN General Assembly, which is, of course, very vague and in contradiction with a lot of carbon power built in China, but it is an announcement, 2060. Then we had the announcement from maybe more solid from Japan, South Korea, South Africa, and then we had the American election. You remember the Joe Biden points on this. I remember that also Janet Yellen frequently referred in past years to the importance of the green transition and of carbon taxes. So I think that we have a rather different and more favorable environment. We are now having our, the Brussels procedures. We are having our impact assessment. We are studying very much because it's technically a very complicated issue. The relation between this carbon border adjustment mechanism and the emission trade system and their free allowances is very complicated, and a lot of business look into this, of course, and understandably. So we will come, I think, in April with first proposal, reach out to foreign partners with these proposals, and then having the final proposal in June.
So, Commissioner, one last question for you, as we are almost out of time. You just touched upon the transition in the US. So beyond climate, how do you see geopolitical relations in the Mediterranean evolving as a consequence of the change of guard in the US? And what do you think the European Union's role can be in this context?
Well, I will not, I think we should not underestimate the importance of what will change. I think Europe and US in the recent years were mostly felt, especially in Washington, as economic competitors more than as allies. I think we are back to normal from this point of view, and we will together work for multilateralism with the new US administration. We will have some dramatic positive change, especially on climate, John Kerry appointment. I hope we will have also a strong fiscal package soon, not easy, of course, depending on what happens also in Georgia in January the 5th. But overall, I think we should be honestly saying that some trends of less involvement from United States globally and also in the Mediterranean were already there before the Trump administration. It's not the Trump administration that identified the pivot to Pacific strategy. I very well remember how difficult it was to involve US after the dramatic killing of Ambassador Stevens in Benghazi in Libya, and we should praise John Kerry for the contribution that at the end he was giving to this problem. But overall, I think that we will not go back to 20th century role of US in the Mediterranean. And this means for Europe that we should remain committed to a major role. I think that Trump administration was, in a certain sense, a wake-up call for the potential stronger geopolitical role of the European Union. And I think we should not, after this wake-up call, imagine to go back to a previous situation that many things will change, but many things are long-lasting trend and will not change.
I'm afraid our time is over. Many thanks to you, Commissioner Gentiloni. It was a pleasure to discuss with you together with Silvia Borrelli from the Financial Times today. And until next time, thank you to our listeners, and thank you, Commissioner, again.
Thank you, Silvia. Thank you, Guntram. And thank you very much to Med Dialogue. Grazie.
Grazie.